And now a little tune written especially for me, Strange Fruit. Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze.
That's a song by Billie Holliday called Strange Fruit. I encourage you to take a few minutes to listen to the entire song. It's on YouTube, and it's deep. So let's start with a story about that song, because the war on drugs section of this class is right around the corner, and this song is actually part of that story. Billie Holliday didn't write the song, but she did perform it, and she managed to get into a lot of whites-only clubs in the South in the early 1900s, which was kind of unheard of for a black woman at that time. She didn't even really like the song, according to her autobiography, but people requested it so often that she wound up performing it a lot. And as you might imagine, in the United States, especially in the South where she was popular, people didn't like being forced to hear heartbreaking songs about racism, lynching, and white supremacy, which is what that song is about. They were trying to take their wife out to have a nice night. What the heck? So Billie starts to get a lot of flack about singing that song, and I mean a lot. In her autobiography, she also talks about literally being chased out of town by the police, and sometimes being shot at. She talks about how she'd save it for the end of the set, for obvious reasons, and then she'd make her escape out the back of the club before the police could catch up to her. But something we'll learn a lot about in the next few weeks was starting to take shape in the early 1900s, a war on drugs that hadn't existed before. Billie Holliday was addicted to heroin, a woman after my own heart in that regard. And since Harry Anslinger, the head of the Bureau of Narcotics, which would become the DEA eventually, the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, since he had authority to send federal agents on drug-busting missions, we'll talk about all of that in a few weeks as well, and since he was an adamant racist, Billie became a longtime target of his. Federal agents started showing up to her shows and warning her not to sing that song. She kept singing it anyway. She was repeatedly arrested and humiliated, and her approval to perform in those white establishments was eventually revoked. But worst of all, when she wound up in a hospital late in her life, on her deathbed no less, she was dying of late-stage cancer, and she was addicted yet again to heroin, largely to medicate that pain. The feds, under Harry Anslinger's orders, they showed up and ordered the doctors to discontinue her methadone, her pain medication. That basically assured that she not only died from cancer, a horrible death, but that she also died suffering from heroin withdrawal that wasn't necessary. Now let's weave this back into our early discussion about Plato's Cave. Remember, Plato had a bit of beef with artists, and by artists, he really meant anyone who creates a representation of anything. No matter how well someone represents something with paint or with clay or with words, according to Plato, they're sure to get a lot of things wrong, causing someone to come to believe a truth that isn't actually true when they look at that art or at that piece of writing. The artist, according to Plato, should really think twice before he puts a shadow on the wall of Plato's cave and, deliberately or not, causes a resident of that cave to come to believe a lie. Not cool, says Plato. We shouldn't fool people even if it's because we want to make art. Harold and DeLuca in the assigned article this week explained that the once public practice of lynching black folks had sort of gone underground, so to speak. At one point in the history of the United States, it was legal and even often celebrated by white folks, which is horrific from our perspective today, but it's really not hard to verify if you just Google lynching photos. And your heart will break, because the white folks who are participating in these events, they weren't ashamed or shy at all. They were dressed in their Sunday best, smiling, posing. It was like they thought they were doing a good thing or something. What the hell, we say now. How could anyone have actually been that misguided? But things started to change, and by the early 1900s, it wasn't legal anymore. And there were a lot of people who really wouldn't approve of it, even though it still happened. There were still lynchings. So instead of seeing it like it used to be, people lived in a culture now where they kind of knew that it happened, but they weren't forced to encounter it all the time. And Harold and DeLuca's point is that that shaped culture. I mean, imagine being a black man walking around Mississippi in 1904 looking to buy a hat or something. So you walk into the hat store. What's up, sales dude? Hopefully you're even allowed in there because, of course, segregation. But anyway, let's assume you find a hat store you can go in. And now you got to shop. You got to bargain with the guy. You got to carry your new hat home. All the while knowing that any white person that wants to mess with you can basically, start a rumor that could lead to your death in a public space. That's what white supremacy is. The creation and maintenance of a system that basically runs itself once the key pieces are in place. You have to always live as if this might happen, even if it doesn't. So Harold and DeLuca are arguing that the invisibility of lynching that showed up in the early 1900s, that it also shaped society, but that it also allowed those far away from the South, say you lived in a northern state and where you were at, lynchings weren't happening very frequently. It allowed those folks to sort of stay on the sidelines of the social justice thing and assume things were just not that bad. I mean, at least we don't have lynchings in the town square anymore, like my grandma told me they used to have. That's what the person could say to themselves as they went to get ice cream or do whatever people did in the 1900s. Emmett Till changed that. His images went viral, and people, everyone, was basically forced to look at these images because so many other people were saying, "Oh my God, Martha, did you see the pictures of that poor kid? It was messed up what they did to him." Now, if you're Martha, you're only going to hear a friend or two talk about this terrible image before you feel compelled to go see it for yourself. You're going to have to seek it out. And when you do see these images, you realize in a split second that it's real, that it's happening. That's kind of your fault. At least a little bit, because you've been eating ice cream or doing whatever people do in the early 1900s instead of calling your senator or protesting. Lynching suddenly wasn't a terrible boogeyman anymore, hidden in the dark where no one saw it. It was now attached to a person, to a body, to a kid. That's the author's point. Now, in my writing and work, I describe this as chronic wokeness, a clunky term that basically means that U.S. citizens have a habit of patting ourselves on the back when, say, the first woman is hired to work as an NFL referee. Instead of saying, "Wait, why is this just the first woman to referee? Why would you need to be a man to be a ref? Wait, have we been super sexist as a culture?" No, we don't say that. Instead, we say, "Nice job. Way to go, us. We're the best feminists ever." We get to feel woke even though our great-grandkids will be a bit confused by how on earth we could feel that way. But then, of course, their grandkids are going to come along and they'll feel the same way about them. Humans are really good at thinking a job is done when it's not, at looking at the small bits we've done and saying, "That's enough, good for us." So right now, 1 in 3 black men born in the United States will spend time in prison if nothing changes. That's compared to just 1 in 18 white men. So we certainly haven't fixed things. I could pull statistics like this out all day. But we are a culture that loves to celebrate the achievements we have made, while often ignoring the obvious incomplete assignments that are still waiting to be done. But then sometimes something big happens, and everyone is forced to see the nasty things that we generally pretend are already fixed. Sometimes George Floyd is murdered and someone catches it on video and the country erupts. We hit the streets. We voice our protest. We demand change. And then we basically go back and if we're not compelled to action in the future, things calm down, we pat ourselves on the back, we go about our business. So this is part of Harold and DeLuca's point too, that sure, the images will compel us to act, and as social activists or photographers, we can use this to inform our practice. But I think they're also trying to make sure they point out the flip side of that, which is that as a culture, we're also predisposed to let things go and not fix them until we are forced to see something that we can otherwise ignore.